The first thing the Galactic Medical Council did when they received the request was laugh. Not openly, not in the meeting room where the request was being discussed, because the Medical Council had protocols about professionalism, and the protocols were generally followed, but in the corridors afterward, in the private communications between senior members, in the particular quality of silence that settled over the room when the request was read aloud, there was laughter. The kind that happens when something is so far outside expectation that the only immediate response is the involuntary recognition of absurdity. The request was from humanity, specifically from Earth's Unified Medical Research Division, submitted through proper channels with proper documentation and proper diplomatic framing, requesting access to the Galactic Medical Council's Restricted Pathogen Archive. The Restricted Pathogen Archive was the most carefully controlled repository in the known galaxy. It contained biological samples, genetic sequences, and complete documentation of every dangerous pathogen that any galactic civilization had ever encountered, cataloged and preserved under conditions that made the archive itself one of the most secure facilities in existence. Access was granted to member civilizations under strict protocols that required demonstrated research need, facility certification, and approval from a council of 7 senior members. No civilization had ever been denied access outright, but no civilization had ever requested access at humanity's level of development before. The protocols assumed a certain baseline of biological research infrastructure. Humanity's infrastructure was, by galactic standards, adequate, not exceptional. The request was, professionally speaking, premature. Senior Counselor Veth had chaired the review committee. She had read the request 3 times before the meeting and had formed a preliminary opinion that she had then spent 2 hours trying to find reasons to
change. She had not found sufficient reasons. The request is technically
compliant, she said at the meeting. The documentation is complete. The facility certifications are adequate. The research justification is, she paused. The research justification is unusual. Unusual how? Asked Counselor Drev. They are not requesting access to study a specific pathogen, she said. They are requesting access to study all of them. The room was quiet for a moment. All of them, Drev said. All of them, she confirmed. The justification states that their research program is focused on developing generalized response frameworks rather than pathogen-specific treatments. They want to understand the underlying patterns across all documented dangerous pathogens rather than addressing them individually. She paused. The justification is scientifically coherent. It is also ambitious in a way that suggests either extraordinary confidence or a research program that is significantly more advanced than their submitted documentation indicates. Which do you believe it is? Drev asked. Veth thought about the question for a moment. I believe, she said carefully, that we should find out. Dr. Amara Ose arrived at the Medical Council's orbital station with a team of 7. Veth had reviewed their files before the meeting. 7 specialists: immunology, genetic medicine, epidemiology, systems biology, 2 disciplines that the Council's classification system did not have existing categories for and had filed under emerging fields, and 1 person whose listed specialty was simply patterns, which was not a recognized medical discipline, and which Veth had spent 20 minutes trying to find a framework for before concluding that it was intentional and meant something she did not yet understand. The pattern specialist was a woman named Dr. Chen, who was the youngest member of the team by approximately 15 years, who said almost nothing in the initial meeting, and who Veth noticed spent the entire meeting watching not the presentations, but the people presenting them. Watching the way someone watched when they were building a model, Ose presented the research program. It was thorough, clear, professionally constructed. It described in terms that the Council's members could engage with the theoretical framework underlying humanity's approach to pathogen research, an approach that Veth found herself leaning forward to follow, because it was doing something she had not seen a research presentation do before. It was not asking to be given something, it was proposing an exchange. We are not here to extract information from your archive, Ose said. We are here to contribute to it. She paused. Our research has produced findings that we believe are relevant to pathogens that your archive contains, but has not fully characterized. We would like to share those findings in exchange for the access that would allow us to complete the characterization. She looked around the room. We believe the exchange is favorable to both parties. We would not have come if we did not believe that. Veth looked at the research summary that had been distributed. She had read it before the meeting. She had read it twice more during the presentation. It was not the summary of a civilization at humanity's documented research level. It was the summary of a civilization that had been doing something, quietly and extensively, that had not appeared in any of their submitted documentation. She waited until the formal presentation was complete and the room had moved into questions. Then she asked the question she had been holding. Dr. Osei, she said, your research findings reference methodologies and data sets that are not consistent with your civilization's documented research infrastructure. The depth of the findings suggests a program that has been running significantly longer and at significantly greater scale than your official research records indicate. She paused. Can you explain that discrepancy? The room went quiet. Osei looked at her for a moment. Then she smiled. Not the performance of confidence, but something more genuine. The smile of someone who had been waiting for a specific question and was pleased it had finally been asked. Yes, she said. That is actually the more important part of what we came to discuss. What came next was not in the agenda. Osei looked at her team briefly. Something passed between them, not words, not signals, just the kind of look that moves between people who have worked together long enough to have a shared language of expression. Then she turned back to the council and said something that Veth had not heard in 32 years of medical council proceedings. What I am about to share is not in our submitted documentation, she said. We made a deliberate decision not to include it in the official submission because we were not certain this meeting would go well enough to make sharing it appropriate. This meeting has gone well enough. She paused. 240 years ago, Earth experienced a pandemic. The room was quiet. You know this, she continued. It is in our historical records. A novel pathogen, rapid global transmission, significant mortality, eventual containment and resolution. Standard pandemic event by galactic historical standards. She paused. What is not in the accessible historical records is what happened in the research institutions during that pandemic. Not the public health response, and that is documented. What happened in the laboratories. She opened a file on the room's display. During the pandemic, Earth's research institutions did something that had not been formally organized before. Every laboratory working on any aspect of the pathogen, treatment, prevention, transmission, biology, every aspect, began sharing their complete raw data with every other laboratory in real time. Not summaries, not papers, complete data sets. Updated continuously, she paused. Before the pandemic ended, this had expanded to include research institutions working on problems that appeared to have nothing to do with the pathogen. Because the researchers involved had realized that the tools they were developing had applications beyond the immediate crisis. She let that sit for a moment. That network never stopped, she said. It has been running continuously for 240 years. Every major research institution on Earth and in every human colony, sharing complete raw data in real time across every field continuously. She paused. The research findings we submitted represent 240 years of a network that size operating continuously. She looked at Veth directly. The discrepancy you noticed is not a documentation error. It is the result of what 240 years of that network produces. Veth spent 3 days reviewing the documentation that Osei's team provided. Not alone, she convened a working group of the council's most senior research analysts, 7 of them, and they spent 3 days together in a way that Veth had not worked in years. Not reviewing, examining, following threads, asking questions that led to more questions. On the second day, one of the analysts, a Koran named Savar who had spent 40 years in epidemiological research, looked up from her workstation and said, quietly to no one in particular, they solved the cross-species transmission problem. Everyone stopped. Show me, Veth said. Savar showed her the cross-species transmission problem was one of the foundational, unsolved problems in galactic medicine. The challenge of understanding how pathogens moved between species with fundamentally different biologies why some crossed species barriers easily and others did not, what the underlying mechanisms were. It had been worked on by every major medical research program in the galaxy for 3 centuries. Significant progress had been made. The complete solution had not been found. Humanity's 240-year network had found it, not recently. The solution was embedded in datasets from approximately 60 years ago, found, apparently, as a secondary result of research into something else entirely, noted in the raw data, incorporated into subsequent work without particular announcement, used as a foundation for the next 60 years of research as if it were simply the next piece of the puzzle rather than one of the most significant findings in galactic medical history. They had found it 60 years ago and had not announced it. Beth looked at the data for a long time. Why didn't they publish this? Savar asked. Beth thought about it. Because publishing it would have required explaining how they found it, she said slowly. And explaining how they found it would have required explaining the network. And explaining the network, she stopped, would have changed how the galaxy saw them, Savar said. Yes, Beth said. And they were not ready for that yet. She paused. Or the galaxy was not ready for it yet. I'm not sure which. The meeting on day 4 was different from the meeting on day 1. The council's members came in with the particular quality of attention that Beth associated with people who had spent 3 days reviewing something significant and had questions that could not wait. Osei's team came in with the same quality of attention, which Beth noted and filed. The questions went on for 6 hours. Not hostile questions, genuine ones. The kind of questions that happened when 2 groups of researchers who had been working on related problems from different angles discovered that the angles were more complementary than they had realized. At hour 4, Dr. Chen, the pattern specialist who had said almost nothing in the first meeting, said something. She had been following the technical exchange with the same watching quality that Veth had noticed on day 1. Then she spoke without preamble into a moment of silence between questions. You have been solving problems one at a time, she said. For 300 years, the Council has approached each pathogen as a separate problem. Each cross-species transmission event as a separate event. Each outbreak as a separate outbreak. She paused. We stopped doing that 240 years ago. When the network started, we started solving the underlying system instead of the individual problems. She looked around the room. The cross-species transmission solution was not found by anyone trying to solve the cross-species transmission problem. It was found by a researcher in a completely different subfield who noticed a pattern in her data that she recognized because she had access to data from 40 other subfields simultaneously. She paused. That is what the network produces. Not faster solutions to known problems. Solutions to problems that you do not know you have yet, found by people who were not looking for them, because they had enough visibility across the whole system to see patterns that specialists cannot. See, the room was quiet. Beth looked at Chen. How many of your current research findings came from researchers who are not working on the problem they solved? Chen thought about it. Approximately 60%, she said. In the last decade, 60%. 60% of humanity's major research findings in the last decade had come from researchers who found something while looking for something else, because they had access to enough of the whole system to recognize what they were seeing. Beth looked at her own research division. At 300 years of careful, focused, disciplined work on specific problems, at the cross-species transmission problem that had been worked on for 3 centuries and had been solved 60 years ago by a human researcher who had not been trying to solve it. She thought about what 300 years of the Council's research might have found if it had been structured differently. She did not let herself think about it for too long. There was work to the access request was approved, unanimously, not just approved, restructured. What had begun as a request for archive access became, over the following 6 months, the most significant research partnership in the Medical Council's history. Not because of what humanity brought to the archive, because of what the archive became when it was connected to humanity's network. The Council's 300 years of pathogen documentation fed into a network that had been running for 240 years, and that processed patterns across the whole system simultaneously, produced findings in the first 18 months that exceeded the Council's output from the previous 2 decades. Not because humanity was smarter than the Council's researchers, not because their equipment was better or their methods were more sophisticated, because they had learned 240 years ago that the most dangerous thing about a problem was thinking you understood its boundaries, that the solution to one problem was almost always hiding inside the data of a different problem if you could see enough of the system at once to find it. They had built a way of seeing enough of the system, and they had been using it quietly for 240 years. Veth filed her assessment of the partnership at the end of the first year. The conclusion was brief. We approved this request, expecting to provide access and receive contribution. We received something we did not expect and could not have predicted, a demonstration that the way we have been doing research for 300 years has been solving the problems we could see while missing the problems we could not. Humanity's contribution to this partnership is not their specific findings, though those findings are significant. Their contribution is a different way of looking. We have spent 300 years developing expertise in what we were examining. They have spent 240 years developing expertise in how to examine. The difference has produced results that I do not have adequate language to describe except to say that I believe we are at the beginning of something rather than the continuation of something, and that the beginning is significantly more interesting than anything that came before it. She submitted it on a Friday. On Monday, she restructured her entire division's research protocols. It took 8 months. She told her team on the first day of the new structure, the most important thing she had done in 32 years. She believed it. She was right.